Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to demonstrate to you how China can rule the earth with iron rods from God from the moon. This may be the most important video I've ever done, so please share and subscribe to my channel, bang the notification bell, and click all. And watch this to the end because I'm going to show you other things they could do. We're going to talk about other things they can do from the moon outside of what I'm about to present to you and why they still could dominate the earth from the moon, unquestionably. Why, for all mankind, for the sake of all mankind, we cannot afford to let China beat us to the moon, which may be what we're on the verge of doing as we're seemingly losing some focus on our lunar program. This could put us all at risk, our freedoms, the continuance of our civilizations as we know it. And how could that possibly be? Well, we're about to get into that because militaries always seek the high ground. This is Point Park overlooking Chattanooga, Tennessee, and there's cannons from the war betwixt the states where there was a fierce battle above the clouds fought for the high ground back in that war. As you know, the ultimate high ground, though, in cislunar space is the moon. And I'm going to explain that in some detail going on right here. So, indeed, China could put a machine on the moon that would give them the ability to dominate beyond belief. This is a mass driver. This is a depiction of a coil gun device which could fling massive amounts of material from the lunar surface into orbit. Interestingly, in this depiction, it's aimed at Earth. Although I don't think that was the intention. This was probably an outcome of the 1970s Ames space colonization lunar studies that they were doing. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. But China on the moon could let China rule Earth all too soon. And that's what we're about to show. We don't want to have planet China. Let China stay in China, right? And if you just want to go to Mars, I got to warn you, Elon, you can't have Mars if at first you don't secure the moon. China won't let you. And here's another thing to bear in mind. China's space program is part of their military, as most of their industry. They are big into dual use stuff. What they do for scientific purpose, for industrial purposes, too often has military applications. So back to this coil gun device here on the moon. This isn't just some science fiction fantasy. Indeed, a lot of engineering was done on this back in the 70s. This is a depiction of how a coil gun works at one level. It shows magnetic coils, electromagnetic coils wrapped around a device that's shooting through it called a bucket here. And these buckets have coils on them so they can be accelerated as these coils are switched on and off going down this coil gun device. In the middle is some inert payload, just lunar regolith, dirt on the moon was what they were trying to launch in these studies. That's what they were looking at. So they needed these coil magnets to make that work. An iron rod would not need these coils. A fierce magnetic material will move through here without the assistance of extra coils. Well, like I said, they were looking at launching inert material back in the 70s to build large solar power satellites in space, something that China's looking to do now, which I'll have to cover in a future video. Now, this is a depiction of one of these coil gun devices. This might have been at MIT, although it could have been at Princeton. But I believe this one is at MIT because Henry Combe is shown here in the picture. I'll explain him a little bit in a moment. But from left to right are Kevin Fine, Jonah Garbus, and Gerard K. O'Neill in the center. Gerard K. O'Neill is the father of the popular space colony concept where you have rotating O'Neill cylinders in space are like worlds turned inside out, that you could have farms and trees and rivers on the inside rotated for artificial gravity. Sounds crazy, but there were ideas for smaller steps leading in that direction, and with a lot of resources in the moon and maybe asteroids, you'd be surprised what you might be able to accomplish. The next one on the right is Henry Combe. And the next one, he is the guy who really drove the research into these mass driver coil guns. And we'll talk about him again in a second. And to the far right is K. Eric Drexler. K. Eric Drexler was on the board of directors of the L5 Society, the National Space Society. I knew him fairly well once upon a time. He went on to write a lot of things about molecular manufacturing and nanotechnology. He popularized the concept. Maybe he actually invented it. He's considered the father of nanotechnology. And his book, Engines of Creation, many of you may know, he went on to found the Foresight Institute to promote the development of such technologies, hopefully responsibly, along with Christine Peterson, who was his significant other, as I understand, at that point in time. Some of you may know her too. So getting back to Henry Combe. Henry Combe calculated that the best projectile would be one shooting from the Earth to the. He was looking at shooting payloads from the Earth to space to provide very low cost bulk matter in space for utilization in space. And he thought you can launch stuff for $1 a pound. This is back when stuff was $5,000 up to $10,000 a pound getting to orbit. Now, he figured if the device was a foot in diameter and 20 foot long, about like a telephone pole, that it would only have 3% loss to ablation in the atmosphere as it left due to that aspect ratio. That was the optimal ratio for a payload that he thought that you could launch from Earth to space. $1 a pound. And the reason it was $1 is he thought he had to build a nuclear power plant to drive this thing. And that was amortization of the payload cost across several payloads shot into space. It could arguably be much cheaper. It's the price of electricity, essentially, for launching. And from the moon, where you have only 1/6 gravity, it takes far less to get an object into orbit than from the Earth. So this is interesting, and we're going to come back to that 1 foot diameter, 20 foot long pole and talk about it as an iron rod in just a moment. So again, losing on about 3% of its mass. Now, this is a depiction of a base like this on the moon that might just be for a ferromagnetic material like an iron rod, because it has just a coil gun circuit going out, not a return circuit, which you'd want to use if you were recovering buckets with coils on them for ferromagnetic, for materials that are not ferromagnetic. Now, this is an example of how a coil gun would work with an iron projectile, which does not require coils to help it be accelerated. Coil bucket, as they called it at the time. And this shows it going down the mass driver. You energize the coil, which pulls it forward, and then you energize the next coil, which pulls it further again. You could switch. You don't have to have the whole coil gun energized at one time. You selectively energize the coils to pull and or push the projectile. The one behind it could also be energized, because at that point in time, the magnetic field moves in such a direction it would actually repel it. So you get some advantage from using both coils. But just to show the pull through, there it is. Now here is, again, a depiction of a mass driver drive coils. You can see them in these circles up here labeled drive coils above and below. It's got some distance between them, and they show bucket coils here with a reaction mass, which was just going to be lunar regular, because again, they wanted to build solar power satellites on them in space and other things out in space. They wanted to get any material up there they could from the moon to use for construction, because there is a lot of material on the moon that could be used, and it's a lot cheaper to get stuff from the moon into space than it is from Earth into space. Which could, again, play back against us should someone decide to weaponize such a device. And that's why we can afford for them to be on the moon before us. Now, this is a cast basalt base. The moon has got a lot of basalt on it, so this is the idea how to secure these launch coils with structure, launch holding structure. And this right here is a cycle flow diagram for such a device that would have the bucket coils that would be recycled through the system. And they were looking at being able to launch up to 6 million tons a year throughput through just one of these devices. 6 million tons a year. Now, an iron rod, 1 foot in diameter, 20 foot long, weighs 3.86 tons. So you could launch over 1.5 million of these a year. 1.5 million iron rods to a device similar to this. That is, what could China do with 1.5 million iron rods from God per year? Well, one thing they could do is they could shoot them straight to Earth and Raster scan fire them with some target on Earth, or they could collect them at the lunar Lagrange point 2, is what O'Neill wanted to do with all this inert matter. And he wanted to have a big Kevlar bag up there with some thrusters that would use some of the dust from these as reaction mass to keep it for station keeping. And the Lagrange point is an inherently gravitational stable point anyway, so you could collect iron rods there too, and you could either upon launch have pre-integrated into them some kind of little guidance package and divert thrusters for extra precision trajectory control, or they could attach them at Lagrange point 2, lunar Lagrange point 2. In either event, that way they might actually shoot a lot more of these at once and then go to raster scan firing from the moon. So who knows, guys? This could be ugly. This is a depiction of a track that has a high point for separating the bucket from the payload. The payload would continue in flight due to inertia, and the bucket would come back down and be recycled. And it's a pull, so it would be braked by the system, and the braking would actually recover some of the energy. So there is some efficiency in a system if you use coils, even with an iron rod, but it's not necessary. A system that has coils on it, adds complexity to the system, and that you got the coils, and then you got a recovery system for them, and another set of coils. You got bucket coils, and you got another set of coils to decelerate the buckets. But for iron rods, that's not necessary. This is, again, a patent on such a concept. Now, to give you an idea why the lunar soil is so valuable, just random samples from the Apollo lunar lander missions showed that lunar soil is 43% by weight oxygen. That's the material we most require for life. That's the element we most require. And we can use it to make water, rocket fuel. It's the heavy element in water. It's the heavy stuff in rocket fuel. To breathe. 20% silicon, which is usable for making photovoltaic cells, solar cells. 19% magnesium, and 10% iron by weight. This is just random samples. I mean, you can probably find areas that's got more. 3% aluminum. The iron and aluminum will be very useful for construction on the moon, or using the materials in space to build large space stations, power stations. China is right now planning to build a giant solar power satellite. Maybe they will use that as an excuse to build one of these on the moon. Oh, we're going to do this for peaceful purposes, to fight the energy crisis, global warming, to save the Earth. And the whole time they're weaponizing everything, including their power sat. I'll go into that more in the future. So there's some titanium and manganese. Tungsten is a trace element, by the way, very trace element. You might find more of it in the Maria, but tungsten was considered to be the rods from God for dropping from low Earth orbit. It gives you a more mass density, but the iron rod from the moon makes more sense just because it works well without having to have coil buckets, and it's far more plentiful than the trace material tungsten. I will show you that it can be quite devastating. As you can see here, the max velocity of the Apollo space capsule coming back from the moon was almost 25,000 miles an hour, 24,791. And energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. So the velocity component is huge. So this velocity is known. Now, they called it re-entry for an Apollo spacecraft because Apollo left Earth, now it's coming back. Well, in this case, it wouldn't be re-entry, it'd just be entry. Often people misapply that term. It would be an atmospheric entry. So this could be vital, because if an iron projectile, 1 foot in diameter, 20 foot long, entered Earth's atmosphere at this speed, again, according to Combs' calculation, you lose 3% of the mass due to heat ablation. An iron rod might actually lose a little bit less, but the iron projectile would release energy equivalent to almost 50 tons of TNT upon impact, 49.86 tons of TNT. This is like the scale of a very small nuclear device. I'll show you that in a moment. The iron projectile will produce a blast radius of 127.22 meters, or over 417.5 feet. Diameter blast. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, I got that wrong. That's the radius, not the diameter. Pardon me. The diameter would be over 800 feet. Wow, guys. Oh, this is huge. This is several football fields. Almost 3 football fields in one blast. Almost 3 football fields. Look at that, guys. That is a huge blast. Now, it would destroy an area the size of 5 city blocks. You can imagine that when you're covering something over 3 football fields. By comparison, the V2 rocket built by the Germans in World War II had a warhead of 1 ton of TNT. 1 ton of TNT. And it wreaked devastation upon London. The people in London feared this weapon. Fortunately for London, they came up with it late. And so it was, in 1945, they were really using it for effect. So, my friends, I actually knew a lot of the German rocket scientists who devised the V2 rocket, including Konrad Denenberg, was a personal friend of mine who designed the engine injectors for the motor on this rocket. Now look at this. This is Whitechapel buildings in London, run by a V2 strike on the 27th of March of 1945. It took out it ended the lives of 134 people, one rocket. So this is what 1 ton of TNT would do. We're talking about nearly 50-ton TNT explosion. So just imagine what you could do if you had 1.5 million of these to rain down on a city from space. Coming in at velocity, you couldn't stop them. I mean, they have so much kinetic energy that if you shot it, it would still keep coming and would still explode, guys. This is, and you would detecting it, you know, it come in so fast, you wouldn't know it. It'd just be over before you knew it. So by comparison, the W-54 nuclear device was also known as the Special Atomic Demolition, which had an adjustable range from 10 to 1,000 tons of TNT. So we're talking more than 10. So we are talking the yields of small nuclear devices. And you can see here the devices on your left in the backpack, and you can see a skydiver, a paratrooper jumping with one. Looks like he's over the water somewhere in that picture. So I don't know if he'd be jumping something heavy into the water, but it was also used, the same W-54 nuclear device was used in the Davy Crockett artillery piece. And by comparison, the little boy, which destroyed Hiroshima on the 6th of August, 1945, was 15 kilotons. Now, this is the Davy Crockett going off. This is an actual photograph from high in altitude. You can see the roads below, way down below, and you can see a fair blast radius around here. Now, I don't know if this was a 10 kiloton detonation or a 10 ton or a 1 kiloton detonation. I do not know if they dialed it down because it was just a test, or if they were firing for effect. I don't know, guys. So, but that's quite an explosion right there. Mushroom cloud going up. So now what I would worry about with so many projectiles available would be a raster scan fire attack. Now, a raster scan is how the old cathode ray TV tubes worked. They had an electron beam that would scan the screen of the TV. And it would fire into little pixels, one after another, along the line, and then go down and fire on another line, and then another line, and it would go all the way down the screen, one pixel at a time. And then we go down the bottom, and then start back over at the top, and do it again. Now, those little pixels were phosphorus, so they glowed for a little bit. So to your eyes, it looked like you were seeing a continuous picture. Now, if you videotaped a CRT, you would see it blinking from this raster scan effect. But the human eye wouldn't detect it. But this was a way of covering an entire screen point by point by point by point. Well, a raster scan would be just covering maybe an entire city or target area with explosions, 5 city blocks at a time. Now, how far apart would the pixels need to be? Maybe 10 city blocks apart. So you could wipe out an entire city. Guys, this would be devastating. With 1.5 million of these, nobody on Earth would be safe. They could go after every city, especially if they collected some up in the Lagrange point 2 beforehand. So this is a devastating potential effect of a weapon. This is an explosion in, looks like New York City, in the metropolitan area. Just to give you an idea, again, this is at the street level. That might be something comparable to 5 city blocks there. In a city, this would be a horrible weapon, especially if they sent several in at a time, or you had a raster scan effect. Now, this don't look like 5 city blocks on each one of these explosions, but it gives you the idea of this thing just setting out a whole line of explosions and doing another line and another line and another line. They could target buildings, streets, whatever they wanted to target. Maybe they'd target streets first just to hold a city hostage, hold a nation hostage. Say, hey, we'll stop if you'll pay the ransom, if you'll surrender, if you'll agree to our terms, which is basically give over your sovereignty. Surrender completely. That could happen with a device like this, and you couldn't stop it. I mean, on the street level, seeing several of these going off at once might look something like that. And they wouldn't even really have to fire that many to put a city into total panic. Just a few of them would put a city in such panic. The mayhem of everyone trying to get out at once would be devastating. Absolutely devastating. People would be in pure abject panic. Everybody would be trying to leave at one time. As you all know, you can't do that in a city. So you'd have wrecks and fires and God only knows what. It would be very ugly. But China has outlined a very ambitious plan to establish a lunar base focused on the moon's south pole, with a target completion date around 2035. And this is part of their International Lunar Research Station project, collaborative effort between China and Russia. mainly. They got some other little partners hanger-ons to give it some air of legitimacy, some of their client states. But anyway, they're aiming to create a comprehensive scientific research facility on the lunar surface or in its orbit. Oh yeah, by the way, I knew both Eric Drexler and Gerard Kilnell. I met Gerard Kilnell, but I knew Drexler better. Anyway, aside from all that, who were developing this device with Henry Cohn. So the development strategy is as follows. Reconnaissance phase 2021 through 2025. As you know, there have been landers and rovers on the moon, the Chang'e landers and rovers. That's what China has been doing. Construction phase. Now, they got it started in 2026. I don't know about that, but sometime between then and 2025, 2035, excuse me. They're planning to build their facility and have it operational in the utilization phase at 2036. That's post-construction for this base. At least that's what they're announcing. Maybe they would try to rush it a little bit because the element of surprise is what really counts in warfare. So a key component of the Chinese approach is the utilization of in situ resources. Chinese scientists developing techniques to manufacture bricks from lunar soil, which could be used to construct habitats and other structures on the moon. This method aims to reduce the need for transport materials from Earth, thereby greatly lowering the cost and logistical challenges of developing large-scale civilization, weapon systems, military bases, wherever they want in space. Large power sets, again, as I think I mentioned, they are planning to build a giant solar power satellite in space. They might use that as an excuse to build this launcher. This is their igloos they're planning to build on the moon to house their people, built from lunar regolith. You can do this with 3D printing, sandbags, just gathering the stuff up. I think I got a depiction of that a little bit later here. But this chart was made before the United States looked like we're backing down somewhat on our Artemis program going to the moon. If both the U.S. and China opt to land their lunar rockets on locations close to the moon's south pole, which is what they currently plan, then U.S. and China are preparing for an embarrassing encounter. The awkward truth is they're targeting the same spots. Well, the more awkward truth is that China may get there before us. That's the scary part. According to Christopher Newman, a professor of space and law and policy, he said, it's not hard to see why they both want the same spots. It's a primary real estate for in situ resource utilization, mainly because the south pole of the moon has apparently water, nitrogen, carbon, stuff that's evaporated where the sun shines, but there's permanently shadowed craters down there. But on the rims of those permanently shadowed craters, they have sunlight 24/7. So you could actually get solar power. 24/7 at those crater rims. So they could have a power station set up, and then they could mine the shadowed regions into the bottom of the craters. So they can get a lot more stuff than I showed in that other depiction there to support their base and other activities. He said this could be the first potential point of conflict over resources beyond Earth. So the Outer Space Treaty was signed by both parties, according to Newman. Thus, theoretically, they should accept the use of celestial bodies for peaceful purposes. Well, someone needs to tell Newman that China is flagrantly ignoring the more recent Law of the Sea Treaty, which they signed in the South China Sea, even ignoring World Court rulings against their violations. As you know, the Philippines have the islands right outside of what's supposed to be their exclusive economic zone that had been taken by China, islands and atolls that they built up military bases on. The Philippines sued in the World Court in The Hague. And the World Court sided with the Philippines because it clearly their activity fit within the context of the Law of the Sea Treaty and what was commonly marine practices even before the Law of the Sea Treaty. And China was violating all of that. But China thumbed their nose at it and said, hey, we'll do whatever we want. And I would expect them to do the same thing on the moon, where the resources are more critical, where this whole thing is more critical, where they could dominate clearly if they had the chance. So the Shackleton, Hawthorne, and Nobel craters, which are close to the lunar south pole, are among numerous comparable landing sites that NASA and China's space agencies identify for their respective lunar missions. Artemis 3, NASA's first crewed mission to the lunar surface, and China's Chang'e lunar rover mission target these points. Well, Artemis 3 may have an issue. But anyway, here it is. Here's a picture of the south pole of the moon. And these areas here are permanently shadowed. No sun shines there, so it's not baking out the volatile materials. You might know the closest planet to the sun is Mercury. Mercury has been detected to have ice in its polar regions where the sun don't shine, even Mercury. So the idea that the moon had it is not such a surprise. We've suspected it for some time, but it was first confirmed by a little satellite known as Clementine. Well, it may not be so small. You can see it on the left. Clementine was a Brilliant Pebbles Strategic Defense Initiative satellite. So Stuart Nozzett, who worked on that program, was also aware of the potential for lunar resources, talked the Defense Department into sending a Brilliant Pebble test satellite to the moon. Instead of just testing the objectives out in our Earth orbit to do the normal things it would do, they shot for the moon. And they actually detected signs of water ice, which has been confirmed by subsequent lunar orbiters since then. So Stuart Nozzett was the program manager of that. And unfortunately, he got stung in a sting operation by I believe the FBI went after him and had him as a dual agent for Israel. And so I think they baited him and set him up, which is kind of questionable practice, but he did fall for it. So shame on him. And that's just too bad. He was brilliant in this project. And God knows what kind of Chinese spies we may have in our system today. But anyway, he did get some honors. I mean, I think I mentioned the L5 Society. Eric Drexler formed the L5, was in the L5 Society's initial board of director member, and the subsequent National Space Society that spun off from that when it merged the National Space Institute, which Wernher von Braun founded actually, and Charles Cornell started the Space Studies Institute. So we had some societies that formed for the purpose of pursuing space development. Now, he got this award from the National Space Society, Space Pioneer Award, in 1994, right after his mission was flown in late 93, early 94, late 93, I believe. So the Clementine mission. I myself received one of those Space Pioneer Awards in 1997 for my Halo rocket, which we shot an amateur rocket into space in 1997, in May, actually, right before this award. So, and this is kind of, you can see this idea of 3D printing igloos on the moon or eggs, whatever you want to do it. This is part of some NASA studies looking at the same stuff, and I did participate in some of these myself. Anyway, it's a brand new problem that's arisen with the direct result of increasing number of nations considering moon missions. This whole idea of both competing for the South Pole at one time. So the locations that the two nations have chosen from our lunar landers are not very shocking, but they couldn't mark a historic first. Now, what's China doing? How's China going to get there? Well, here's their Long March 5 rocket they've been launching on their Chang'e probe zone. They've also got a Long March 10, which is going to be their future crew rocket, which is even bigger than this guy. But this guy can send 55,000 pounds to low Earth orbit. China successfully developed cryogenic rockets to support lunar, Mars, and space station projects in recent years, strengthening its space transportation and deep space capabilities. It's currently developing reusable launchers and super heavy rockets and a two-stage to orbit reusable space plane, and also the Long March 9, which is actually a three-stage rocket. And the first two stages of the Long March 9 will use methane LOX, just like Starship. But the upper stage, for more efficiency, is using liquid hydrogen, which, if they could get to the lunar South Pole, they might be able to replenish from the moon to low Earth orbit or refuel it in the future. Who knows, guys? But anyway, this thing's been going through a lot of design changes. But if you notice, it does have resemblance to the SpaceX Starship. And here it is in the lineup of the heavy lift launch vehicles. Friends, if you look at it, what you'll see is over here is Long March 10, which is intended to be flown in 2027. It's not flown yet. This guy here is intended to be flying soon afterwards. And if you look at a comparison, it's not as tall as Starship, but it's a lot bigger in diameter, much bigger in diameter. And they're looking at launching 150 tons to low Earth orbit compared to 100 tons for Starship. So if it does, as it performs, it will be able to launch more payload to low Earth orbit than even Starship. And everything in China is so cheap, it may be cost comparable to them, to the Starship. So Starship has competition here, guys. And so with this kind of device, the Chinese could mount a very aggressive space development program with the Long March 9, along with the Long March 10s and 5s. And also Russian rockets will be a part of the mix too. as you will know. And China's also developing a 1 megawatt space nuclear reactor. And I've done a video on that. You might want to watch that video. Why would they need 1 megawatt a nuclear reactor in space? I mean, that's 10 times more power than the International Space Station. What are they going to do with all that power? How about run a mass driver from the moon? That may be what they're doing. Anyway, guys, now you go, oh, well, they put a mass driver on the moon. We'll just take it out. You know, if they get a base set up, no worry, Greg. Not so easily done. I've had people tell me, oh, well, there's nowhere, and we'll just take it out if you put it on the moon. Guys, it takes 3 days to get to the moon with rockets. 3 days to get to the moon. By the time you fire to leave low Earth orbit, 3 days. So and when you fire that translunar injection, they're going to know you're coming. For 3 days, they're going to know you're coming. They could sleep, and the guys on the moon base up here, they could be sleeping. They could be watching this thing, just sleeping and having a merry old time, partying, eat, all their meals, 3 meals a day, go to bed, get up, eat 3 meals a day, go to bed, get up again, then decide to do something about it. And they could just launch a bucket of sand at it. It's the relative velocity, so a bucket of sand from the moon would totally devastate anything coming. So you won't get there. You won't get there. They can take you out at their leisure. Now, moreover, they might decide to take you out upon launch. They may decide, now they get so much stuff up there, they may send some down to low Earth orbit and set them up in stations on low Earth orbit to fire upon anything launching. They could literally deny you access to space. They could, and with that big, I'm going to have to do another video on this large solar power station. And again, also that big nuclear reactor they're planning to put in space. They could transmit microwaves, very strong. They already have a satellite for attacking Starlink with microwaves. And that's using just regular power systems. So they think they can take Starlink out. Now, just imagine what all they could take out when they get that kind of power in orbit. They could fry the electronics and spacecraft trying to launch. You don't want to blow spacecraft up if you can avoid it. You just create more shrapnel, which could deny everybody access to space. So we'll talk about that some more too. But they could just fry your electronics. They could literally fry them to keep you from going up. Or they can get you on ascent coming off of the Earth. There's many ways they could stop you from getting into space. So as I said, I was going to talk about other things that the Chinese could do aside from using the mass driver projectiles, iron rods, and God, let's say they don't get it to that level yet. They could take mass from the moon and pack it around power stations, laser sats, and things like that in low Earth orbit, and have a lot of thermal mass. One of the problems with the laser station is that you have to have a way to dissipate the heat when you're firing these things a lot. So when you fire a laser, you're generating heat. Well, if you had a big thermal mass sink, you could sink that into it. Also, if you take thermal mass and pack it around your satellites and your space objects, you actually could protect them from orbital debris because you've got a built-in shield. So even if they do create an environment with too much junk where you couldn't get into space normally, if they're using materials from the moon, they may have their built-in shields, and they could come up with a space transportation architecture in Earth and Moon that uses devices with those shields built in and keep flying once they get to the moon and get all that cheap material from the moon first. So see, there's many ways they could use a moon that would not serve us well if we allow them to get there first. So according to Newman, it will be interesting to see what happens. And then he said, a lot will depend on who gets there first. Now, he said this several years ago. Well, now it looks like China may have the upper hand. They may be ahead. For all mankind, we have to beat China to the moon. We cannot afford to let them get there before us. Because if we allow them to build a station like this and not have the ability to shut it down, should they use it for ill purposes, then we're in severe trouble. We need an equal base on the moon. We need a space force up there, not just NASA. We need a military force on the moon. We need Space Force moon base. First moon base, American moon base, was actually designed by the U.S. Army. It was long projected. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has the job of building military facilities, and therefore they really should be in charge of building the moon base. So there you go. In any event, my friends, this is a real threat. We can't afford for China to beat us to the moon. So I'm going to say thank you for watching. Again, make sure you subscribe, bang the notification bell, and click all, my friends. So we need to support this idea that we got to get to the moon. We can't falter. Hang on a minute. I'm going to stop the share for just a second. Guys, you know, the SLS rocket is very expensive. It's really too expensive. It's old technology, but it is the only large man-rated rocket we got right now. Maybe it needs to continue just for a little space. We need to get SpaceX going, but the SpaceX Starship lunar lander is top heavy, and well, it's just heavy and long, and it produces a lot of thrust. It's going to blast a crater out trying to land on the moon. It'll flip over. Something's got to get there and put down a concrete pad first. That's why we need Blue Origin in the mix. We need to really accelerate this whole program for lunar base. And by doing that, we need to get the Space Force involved in. Oh, yeah, this little badge up here is for the Space Force. I'm not in the Space Force, but I think they've got a role to play on the moon. So we need to be there. NASA can be there, but the Space Force needs to be part of it too. I mean, everything China does is got a military dual use. NASA's pure civilian. So we can't afford for it just to be NASA. We need to get the Space Force involved and accelerate our lunar program so that the Chinese do not beat us. We cannot afford it, because if China could, here's nothing about this Raster scan fire thing. There's no radiation. They could fire into a city and not even hit the areas where they have their consulates, their businesses, their personnel, their Chinese police stations, their whatever they cherish in a particular city, Chinatown, Chinese restaurant, whatever. They could avoid those. In fact, they probably know where everybody lives. They could make sure they avoid apartments that have a lot of Chinese people in them, maybe, or sleeper cells, whatever they got here. They could avoid it. They could target selectively whatever they wanted to target on Earth. They could take out an entire city without the effect of radiation, and so they won't have a blowback on them. So nuclear war has a blowback. It could, end life on Earth. This wouldn't. This would be selective and devastate. This is a fearsome weapon that could end any other country, any other civilization that don't suit them. If they want the whole world to be just Chinese people, well, they may have other means of that too. We'll talk about that in the future, my friends. So once again, thank you for watching. Subscribe, bang the bell, watch my other videos. Greg out.